I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of some of the characters from the Bible. And today we're going to be talking about Adam and Eve. And it was a very, very complicated, long piece of work to do the research on this and to figure out what to discuss. So basically what I did was I broke it down into two parts. The first part is a few thoughts, and then I had a couple of questions that I thought would be of interest with some answers. So just to go over the basics, I assume that we all know the basic story of Adam and Eve, otherwise known as Chava, and that is that God created the world, He completed it with all the greenery and the animals and everything, and then when everything was set, He created Adam, and then from Adam He created Eve, Chava, and they were placed into the Garden of Eden, and they ate from the tree of knowledge, which they weren't supposed to do, and as a result they were banished. Now, that's the simple story. There are some things that I think would be interesting to note. I think that what happens is that a lot of times when people study things like the Bible, so they just imagine a version of themselves. And while that's great to try to work on yourself and improve yourself and get a feel for the situation, but the reality is that Adam and Eve were very real people, and they were individuals, and it would be nice to get a feel into who they actually were. And I think that the first thing to note is that if we were to try to get an idea of where Adam was coming from, we would have to picture ourselves waking up from a coma with absolute amnesia, having absolutely no clue where we came from, who we are, and all of a sudden we just exist. We don't know anything about our background or anything like that. If you really give that some thought, it's unbelievable to be created into this reality. Now, another thing that I wanted to point out is that we would think that if Adam was created and then put into the Garden of Eden, he would be very, very careful not to get banished from it. And he would just be on his best behavior, and he wouldn't get the urge or anything to have anything from any fruit, but rather he would be so cautious. But I think what we have to understand is that we need to compare the Garden of Eden to, let's say, perhaps somebody that was born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Let's say somebody was born wealthy. They don't know that what they have is better than others. It's the only thing that they know. And so I think similarly, when it comes to Adam, he didn't know that he had this amazing scenario that he's in the Garden of Eden and he should be cautious to protect it. But rather, that was just his reality, like everybody has their reality. Now, the last thing I want to point out is, as far as Adam being created from the earth, God took a clump of earth and he breathed life into Adam, and that's how he came to life. And I think that we have to consider why was he created from earth? Why not created from grass or trees or something beautiful or majestic? Why that location? And I think that earth is the great equalizer. As we see, a great example is the park. When you have children in a park and they're playing, they're pretty much all on equal footing. Yeah, one kid might have a better toy, the other kid might have a better ball, but the reality is that when you're in the outdoors, that's pretty much the equalizer. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that that's where Adam was created from, considering that he had to be the role model for all. And so if he was going to be created in one form or another scenario, we would question it. But since he was created from outdoors, it's something that we know everybody can relate to. Why did God create Adam complete? Why wasn't Adam born and then grow up like the rest of us do? I mean, why didn't God raise Adam? And what is going on over here? How are we supposed to be able to relate to this? So my thought was as follows. Adam was created complete so that as a role model, we can't get thrown off by his childhood or his status, as with other characters that were meant to teach us other lessons. He was born with complete intellect, which God would count as raising him. In fact, the only reason why we need to raise our children is due to the lack of ability of them being readily created like Adam. So it's actually the other way around. And why aren't they born like Adam? Why aren't they born completely ready? God created the world so there should be a circle of life, a family unit. Now, obviously that couldn't happen at the beginning because they were at the head of the train. But once Adam and Eve were created, so then the rest of us were able to follow that front and join into the circle of life, which was the whole goal of the world to begin with. So they had their job and we had our job, and that was the one difference, was how they were created and why we were not created the same way, but rather we would help create the circle of life by growing up and having a family circle. Now, my next question is, if we're supposed to relate to Adam, why wasn't he born from blood and skin and bones? Why was he taken out of the earth, which seems very different than the way we're born? And I think that the answer is hidden in the fact that God brought him to life by breathing into him, something that he didn't do with any other being. And that is the common denominator, that it wasn't anything else but God's breath that made Adam so special. So as a result, it doesn't really matter that he wasn't born from blood and skin and bones. Actually, if he was, that would be an identifier. And it doesn't really matter that we were not born from earth, because we have God's breath blown into us, and that is the main point. Now, my next question is, why was everything else put into existence first and Adam last? And subsequently, why didn't the animals kill Adam? Why did he name them? And I think the answer is that when God made Adam, he said man will rule over all the other beings. And the answer to all this is that it shows there was preparation, everything was prepared for him, and it shows domination and intellect, that he was able to strategize himself that way. Why does Eve, Chava, being taken from Adam's body, become the reason a man will leave his parents to cling to his wife? It says in the Bible that when God created Eve, so he said, and as a result of Eve being created, so when a man gets older, when he grows up, he will marry a woman and he will leave his parents and he will cling to them. Why is this? Especially since Adam didn't even have parents, so what's the point of this? And at the same token, why was Eve created by being taken from Adam's body, yet for the rest of history, all that are born come from a woman's body? So I think that had Adam not needed Eve, he would have stayed bound up with God. Just pure logic. He would have had a closer relationship with God, which was basically his father, as a reaction to the fact that Eve was created, his wife, so he connected with her. And so similarly, since Adam needed Eve, and then he had a closer relationship with her and a more distant relationship with God, so us too, when we grow up, when we get married, we have a closer relationship with our spouse and a more distant relationship with our parents. Now, additionally, I think the reason why Eve was created from Adam is because, being that God is the third partner in creating a child, and the original person that was reproduced came from a man, came from Adam, and then all subsequent people came from a woman, from Eve. So we see that everybody has an equal partner in the creation of a child. And people wouldn't be able to say that it's a woman that creates a child, but rather it's all three partners, very clearly underlined by the fact that the very first person who was created came from actually a man. The next question is, how was Adam expected to make good choices when he was tested? Not to eat from the tree of knowledge without developed intellect or an upbringing. How could we expect him to have held back from making that decision? So I think the answer lies in the fact that immediately upon creation, they were given instructions. They were told to be fruitful, to rule the animal kingdom, to manage the foliage and food. And so they were obviously created with complete intellect. As we see in the Bible, the first thing that happened after he was born was that God brought him all the animals to be named, and he did a perfect job. So we see that once again, just because we didn't see him growing up does not mean that he was not born complete with intellect. The next question is, why was Eve's punishment for not listening to God to suffer in childbirth, and Adam was to have to work hard? And I think that, to answer this question, we have to understand what was going on in the Garden of Eden. So now, in the Garden of Eden, everything was sublime and amazing and beautiful. And Adam's only job was to take care and mind all the trees there and everything that needed to be taken care of. But it was very, very light work. Basically, it took care of itself. He had to do very light work. So as a result, when they were thrown out of Eden, he had to work harder. So I don't think it's that his punishment for doing the sin was that he had to work harder, but I think it underlines the fact that when he got thrown out of Eden, so now in order to survive, since he wasn't in this Eden, but rather just regular earth, things were more difficult. So it was the best example to show the most dramatic change in his existence was that now he had to work hard. And I think that as far as Eve having to suffer in childbirth, since Eve was the one that convinced Adam, plus herself ate from the tree of knowledge, which started the spiral of making things different than God originally intended, so we could say, quote unquote, suffered, so her punishment had to be matched in kind also. I know that's a little complicated, a little difficult to hear or understand, and I just think that I would love comments, feedback in the comments section. God gave Adam just one chore, to take care of the trees in the Garden of Eden, and it was very easy. And now, since he had to come out to the real world and survive, it was most noticeable that he had to work by the sweat of his brow just to survive. Now, the question is, how are we supposed to relate? How does any of this relate to us? And I think that what we're supposed to learn from this is that Adam and Eve were the original role models, and no one is perfect. The entire creation of Adam started with a sin, and so he began living outside of Eden, where God clearly wanted us to be. Yet they were at the same time almost the most perfect human beings that ever lived. So we shouldn't be so hard on ourselves when we make mistakes, because we're never going to be perfect. The original role models were not perfect right out of the gate. And finally, my last question is, why was the Garden of Paradise created after Adam? We know that the entire world was prepared for him beforehand, and then paradise was created after Adam, and then he was placed in there. And subsequently, what was the gain of being thrown out of paradise for them and for us? First of all, to answer the first part of the question, I think the reason why Gan Eden, the paradise, was created after him was because it was something special, it was something beautiful. And so therefore, instead of him just seeing it ready like the rest of the world, it made it stand out. Like, this is being created especially for you to go into somewhere really special. And we need to know that everything that God does, he does for the good. So perhaps if we stayed in the Garden of Eden, both them and us, the following generations, would not be able to do the proper repentance to bring the world back to its original state, which is our job. And since Adam and Eve brought the world down a caliber, so it was their job, and it is our job to bring the world back up to where it was. And this cannot be accomplished within the Garden of Eden, but rather it has to be done out here in the real world. I hope this was as enjoyable for all you watching as it was for me to create this video. It was very, very interesting to do all the research and learn all these things. And I hope you all enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the next episode. Take care now.